I want to welcome you all, and I want to welcome you to this process. If you all have not been part of one of our neighborhood planning processes before here in Somerville, I want to give you a little background on what's going on and what we're doing here today and what we're doing here for the next 2 days. For those who I don't know and don't know me, my name is George Proakes. I'm the Director of Planning here at the City of Somerville's Office of Strategic Planning and Community Development. Working here with a number of staff folks from our department, a number of consulting folks who are working for our department, and I'll have the opportunity to tell a little bit more about that as we go. I want to welcome Alderman Niedergang from Ward 5, who's waving to me in the back over there. I believe he is our... What's that? I do appreciate your presence here in Union Square. You're a little out of the boundaries of Ward 5, but that's okay. That's encouraged, and you know, I love to see elected officials, no matter where they've come from, to come participate in our process. So welcome, thank you, I just want to provide a little background, I guess, on what we do and why we do it. And Brad Rawson over here is going to help me by taking notes and stuff as we go and getting some feedback. So in general, this is not designed to be a significantly formal presentation. I will, you know, if as we go we need to take questions or stuff, we can do that. But I want to start with a little bit of an understanding of what we're doing. So we have gathered here today over the course of the next 3 days to do the next step in a process that started back in December to create a neighborhood plan for Union Square. This is the sixth neighborhood plan process that we have engaged in. We've completed plans for Gilman Square and Lowell Street Station using the Somerville by Design process that we're using here. We have ongoing work in Davis Square and East Somerville. We are continuing our work in a number of areas as it relates to Union Square, as it relates to neighborhood planning. And here we are in Union Square doing a neighborhood plan for Union Square. This is not a neighborhood plan for the developer's side of Union Square. This is not a neighborhood plan for 3 blocks in the middle of Union Square. This covers the idea of where we are going as an entire neighborhood and where we want the neighborhood to go over the next decade and decades beyond. And this is really a key part of what our Summer Vision Comprehensive Plan talked about, because it's the opportunity to understand how we implement the Summer Vision Plan in a place like in an individual neighborhood like Union Square. Now, there has been, that is essentially what we call the Somerville by Design process for Union Square. If you go to somervillebydesign.com, you can follow along a lot of the stuff we've been doing in other neighborhoods, some of our other work going on, kind of where and how we do this. You can look at the entire schedule for the next 3 days. We're here all day today. We will be here all day tomorrow. The studio's open. People can come in. They can see what we're doing. If they want to, they can take a base map and trace paper, and you can draw your vision for Union Square and put it up on the boards too, along with our consultants' work. Any ideas? We don't spend a lot of time vetting our ideas. We put up all our ideas, and we try to get through to Wednesday, where we put them up and get feedback on Wednesday. So Wednesday night here in this space, 7:30? I think 7:30. We are going to do our final pinup presentation, where we show all of the results of the 3 days worth of work, and we present that in the presentation here, and then we ask for your feedback. It is a little later in the evening because, believe it or not, we really need right up until 7:30 to get that presentation ready to be ready to present and have you all here to see what we're doing and how it all went. And then we have some follow-up meetings to follow in the months beyond, and the idea is eventually we're working towards putting together a plan for Union Square. It's going to inform and assist with the development that the US2 master developer is doing on the parcels they're working on, but also questions of what is the future of Somerville Ave, how do we take care of things down by the Old American Tube Works process, and kind of all of the mix of those sort of things as it relates to the future of Union Square. We are also working right now on a zoning overhaul project, and I think sometimes these things get kind of muddled and confused and mixed up a little bit, and I just want to clarify that we do have a zoning overhaul proposal that's in front of the Board of Aldermen. They had a public hearing on it. They're collecting written comment. What we have done in the citywide zoning overhaul as it relates to Union Square is we've carried over the basic building heights and building sizes that were in the Union Square zoning work that was done in 2009. We're not making radical changes there. fundamentally, what we want to come out of this neighborhood plan is some direction on issues like zoning. So if the neighborhood plan says things should go taller here, things should go lower there, things should be more dense here, things should be less dense there, that's the kind of stuff we need to know in order to make sure that we get that straight. But to be clear, the zoning overhaul that we're doing, because we're doing it a little bit ahead of this plan, it implements the plans that are done. It doesn't implement this plan because this plan's not done. But as this plan gets done, the tools in that overhaul, the types of districts we've created, the way we've organized the plan, makes it easy to adapt things for places like Union Square, whether it be using one of our mixed-use districts, like 5-story mixed use or 7-story mixed use for a different area, or using a tool like the special districts, like we did we're proposing for Brick Bottom, which basically requires a certain percentage of commercial development and a certain percentage of affordable housing and a certain percentage of usable public civic space in order to be able to build anything of a significant size. You can do any of a number of these tools that may or may not be appropriate for portions of Union Square. So, in this process, as I said, we're looking to see where we're going towards the future. And we're informed by the Summer Vision Comprehensive Plan, which how many people here have heard about, know about, read about the Summer Vision Comprehensive Plan? So fundamentally, what Summer Vision says is that we are trying to create between 2010 and 2030, create 30,000 new jobs, 6,000 housing units, of which 1,200 of which will be permanently affordable. Talks about making as many of those trips as possible, more than half, walk, bike, or transit trips, so that we're not adding any more cars on the road than we absolutely need to. And I think that we could do even better than that as we go. But the key to the Summer Vision Plan is that it's a plan for conservation of neighborhoods, and it's a plan for growth in the places where growth makes sense. And this map, which talks about the green, the areas to conserve, the blue, the areas to enhance, and the orange, the areas to transform, which include Boynton Yards and the area kind of coming up Union Square to Prospect Street, is a key to making sure to have that balance right. Now, 30,000 jobs, 6,000 housing units. We put a lot of numbers into the appendix of Summer Vision to talk about how many square feet of jobs, square feet of housing, what you need. We tried to lay it out by neighborhood, but it's less than perfect, because I think areas like Boynton Yards will probably run a little bit ahead of areas like Interbelt and maybe be able to pick up a little more of that development, while areas of Interbelt might be after 2030 before some of that stuff happens. But fundamentally, we have some basic numbers of what you could do there, but they're not perfect. One of the things that's been pretty interesting is in 2011, when we were working on Summer Vision, we were estimating you needed 300 square feet of office space for every job. We're seeing a lot of people build now at 175 square feet, 160 square feet of office space for job. Partners Healthcare at Assembly is in that range. Realistically, maybe 200 is a more realistic number to post at this point. Lab needs a little more space than office, but essentially that has changed a little bit. But the key is Summer Vision calls for these numbers and this strategy and everything, and essentially it calls for using the transformational areas to build new neighborhoods or build extensions of great neighborhoods that we already have. And the key is we're not building apartment tower complexes, we're not building office parks, we're building neighborhoods. And that has been a key piece of Summer Vision. And that has been a key piece of what we've tried to implement in Summer Vision by doing the neighborhood plans, like, for example, the one we've done in Gilman Square and the one that we hope to have for here someday in the future. So what I want to do is lay out where I think we have some agreement on the possibility of what could happen in D2 and D3. And I guess my first question is, how many people were here when the developer presented their thoughts on this about a week and a half ago on the 25th? Okay. So, I think that what was interesting is we had one idea come out. Essentially, the developer put together a proposal that was their idea for this site. And there's been a lot of talk in the community. I've heard one way or the other about what people like about it, what people don't like about it. And I'm going to try my best to see if I could summarize where there is some consensus on this, and see how well I may do at that. The first thing is that it seems that there's an idea that people understand that what we want here is a mix. What we want here is a neighborhood. What we want here is the things we talked about in Summer Vision. Housing, retail, office, lab space. Developer proposed a hotel, I haven't heard any significant objections to that, except for the idea that I think if the hotel provides the only jobs beyond just housing and retail, that isn't ideal. But the idea of a hotel as part of a mix, hotels help bring office and the other things in. They do create a set of jobs in certain categories that provides them quality. They probably, on a square foot by square foot basis, may provide the best tax return to us of just about any use, because they have a hotel tax and on top of the property tax we receive. But quality office and lab space seems to be priority number one. Where we have housing, there seems to be an interest in making sure it's different sizes, different unit types, different needs. And then that it's important to keep in mind that there's been a request for quite a while to make sure the city is participating in a community benefits agreement to generate other benefits out of that site. Now, before I jump any further into this, does anybody have any fundamental objection with anything there? Yes? Yes, yes. Okay, so let me add green space to this list. Wait, yeah. Okay, so, but generally, if a hotel wanted to be a part of the mix, we're okay with that, but you understand the hotel's looking for, yeah. Okay, so you would say, when I don't have the numbers, we have, their team has folks doing some work, and we have our own folks we have a fiscal impact discussion going on with the 6:30 session, but fair enough to say the wet lab probably is the jackpot of generator of tax base. The hotel has some real advantages, the office has some advantages, and we'll dig deeper into what the housing does. But all right, do I have other thoughts on this? Well, let me take a step back as to kind of where we are. I will dig a little bit deeper into why we encouraged planning D2 and D3 first, so to speak, albeit now we're here at the neighborhood plan process and we're doing it as a part of the neighborhood plan process. But fundamentally, there were a couple of key things that we heard out of the community process for quite a while. One of the more significant ones was that we wanted to work collaboratively towards finding solutions. One of the other ones was, if the developer's out there doing plans for what they want to do, the community wanted to know what they are. The developer came up with a plan. They presented that one plan at the meeting a week and a half ago, and I think that is where we are. They put one plan out there. I want to tap the best and most valuable knowledge of all of the folks in the room to determine what other thoughts we may have, whether it brings you back to that plan or it brings you to something else. We'll get there. But I guess I want it, understanding this and kind of where we are on this. I want to dive a little bit further into kind of where we are with these two particular sites as it relates to the rest of the site. So here's a bit about D2 and D3. This is the station. This is D3 over here. The developer has locked up agreements on the big piece of D3 that's right next to the train station. And then here is basically a rough assumption of what D2 looks like in a kind of wasteland sort of experience. It's kind of like that yet, but not quite, because there's still a couple buildings standing on it. But sure, no problem. This is the corner of Prospect and Somerville Ave. This is Dunkin' Donuts and Ebby Sushi, and then if you come up Prospect Street, you're going like against traffic here, because traffic goes this way. All right, D2 is the whole block that comes from where the bridge goes over the railroad tracks all the way down to the corner of basically as you get into the core of Union Square. D3 is in the piece that goes from the railroad tracks back around and then sort of comes back into Boynton Yards. The station is going. The tracks are here. The commuter rail tracks get shifted over, and the station basically gets built on the D2 side, kind of the Union Square side. It has one entrance that's off the bridge, straight at bridge height. It has another entrance that's down a level below, probably I think 15 feet lower than the road. That entrance is there for a couple of purposes, most significantly to provide circulation for their drop-off process. Now, I'll step into that in a minute, but okay. Well, let me step into that now. So, where we are right now is the D2 site. This entire site is owned by the Somerville Redevelopment Authority. So it's under the control of a city authority. The D3 site is owned privately. It was marked in the redevelopment plan as a site that the redevelopment authority could acquire, but it has always been our hope that the master developer will work through negotiated arrangements with people to address that. So they have one with this particular owner. This is the Beacon Sales site. And then behind it is Royal Light, where they haven't gotten there yet, but you could imagine that essentially D3 is Beacon Sales and Royal Light. And Beacon Sales is right next to the tracks. So it's the piece that's right opposite the station entrance as you come in. Now, what the T has to deal with, so what we have is we have a site that the redevelopment authority owns. It's essentially, it's dirty dirt. Pretty much everything in Somerville is dirty dirt of some sort. So it's brownfield type work. It needs cleanup. There's some federal grants to do cleanup work, and some of that can be done that way, but some other of it has to be covered pretty much by the developer. So our expectation, the redevelopment authority's expectation, is the developer has to cover the land cost, what it took us to acquire it, the cleanup cost, and then be able to get to a point where they can build a project that can make them enough money to be financed and still create the community benefits and maybe the tax increment district that we need in order to do infrastructure and all of those other pieces. So that's one of the challenges with that. Now, the reality is the real estate market may not be of much concern to us, but if we want the jobs and we want the community benefits, we need to at least understand some of the basics of kind of what they're focused on. You know, housing markets are strong. I think that's been pretty obvious around here. At some points in time, I think I've described the Somerville housing market as infinite. I think you could build housing, and there'd be a significant amount of demand for it. I do think that there's some real opportunity in that area. Commercial markets can be strong, but the challenge of commercial markets is the people out there financing them are usually looking for pre-leases or some sort of agreements or something like that. So that's one of the challenges out there. It's not a reason not to chase commercial. It just means it's a little bit of extra work. So that's kind of where those different pieces are. I want to dig into kind of where the T is with all of this in a little bit more detail, because I know this kind of came up as a topic sort of after the last meeting, and it was a little bit confusing as to, I think, what's going on. So there's D2. Do you have a question? Sure. No, go ahead. Go ahead. This is a good transition spot. Sure. No. No. Well, I mean, there are a series of state and federal laws on how much you have to clean up a site based upon what you're going to do with it. And I don't even know if I'm not even aware of a waiver process that exists from site cleanups. There's a MEPA waiver. That's a totally different concept. That relates to so Massachusetts Environmental Policy Act is a regulation that sets the rules for how you have to get permits to go through the state permit process. Sometimes developers request a phase 1 waiver, which basically allows them to move a portion of their project ahead of getting permission on the whole rest of the site. That usually relates to how you deal with things like traffic, how you deal with kind of the overall regional implications of the project. I worked a couple of years ago on a project in Lowell, and we had a large development site. And there was one mill building in the middle of it, and that mill building was like on the verge of falling down, and the historic folks wanted to keep it. And they sought out a phase 1 waiver so that they could do the mill building ahead of filing the full application to do their environmental review on, to do their MEPA review, their environmental review on everything else, their traffic impacts, environmental impacts, all those other pieces. It doesn't mean that they're actually waiving the regulation. It just means that they're allowing them to let that project be viewed on its own, separate from the overall rest of the project, if that makes sense. I don't know if I'm explaining that. Wig, do you want to explain that better than I can? Yeah, and to be absolutely clear, a phase 1 waiver, which allows a project to go forward, doesn't allow them to cut corners on the actual environmental cleanup. It just means that it's reviewed and allowed to move a little bit ahead of the rest of the timing of the rest of their filings. It doesn't let them cut. They're not waiving the environmental standard. They're merely waiving the time frames that they're using on that process. Did that? Yeah. So first of all, I'll say thank you, Alderman Niedergang. I hear your point. I hope that one of the ideas of what we do through a 3-day charrette is generate ideas, generate them from the policy perspective, but also from the design perspective. One of the things we and the city's team, the developer is here and has been partnering with us and has a design team working with them, and that's been great. But one of the things we and the city's design team has been looking at is what what the options are on the different lots and what does lay out best for residential and what does lay out best for commercial and what options work on that and how you can make it work, and does it make the most sense that D2 and D3 are mainly commercial sites and that D6 and D1 are places for more housing, or or flipped some different way. So I hear you. No determination has been made to answer that question yet, essentially. The developer put on the table their idea of what they'd like to do on D2 and D3, and I think it's basically one option. It's an interesting one to look at. Our design team, I think, generated 3 more today, so I just want to say we're going to keep on digging our way through this, but as we do these, we learn about what the financial realities and the scheduling realities are of one versus the other, and we try to figure out what's the best we can do. I think as I'm hearing the community consensus, I've heard the same thing you're hearing, that the key is making sure to get the most job creation office type activity as close to the station in the early phases of the project as we possibly can. So I'm trying to see how we make that happen and what the opportunities are and what the constraints are. There are, I think there are 2 constraints on the D2 site. One is the shape of sections of the parcel, and the other is this MBTA ride drop-off piece. That doesn't mean it's impossible. That just means we need to understand them as constraints and understand what they mean and sort of collectively figure out how to address those sort of things as they come up. You know, so that I'm going to dive into this ride drop-off challenge unless people have, yeah, go ahead. Okay. So you have one more? Sure. Well, I mean, I'm happy to do that. My fundamentally coming back to the key points on this whole thing, I think if you did all of D2 and all of D3 as all one thing or all the other, you're going to create a space that's very desolate at least one part of the day or the other. And I guess if you want to ask the question, if you want to be more commercial or more residential, I'm happy to ask that question, but I would really advise you not to go all one way or all the other.
So actually, that's a great jump-off point, Tori, and what I want to say for folks who aren't familiar with the 3-day charrette process that we've used in 5 other Somerville neighborhoods over the last 3 years is that as ideas are drawn, no idea is too outrageous, and it's really important for us to test everything. And so you'll see a series of sketches and ideas that have been pinned up on our pinup boards already. And as George mentioned, our team's been working hard for 6 hours already, and we've got 5 different ideas on 5 different sites throughout the neighborhood. There's an important step of this process, which is giving folks the ability to essentially vote ideas up or down. And that doesn't mean that ideas in their entirety either get endorsed or thrown out. More often than not, it is, oh, you folks got this piece right, but this piece over here I don't think would work. Can we send that one back to the mill to actually be improved a little bit? So that process will occur over this 3-day charrette event, but it most particularly will occur during our evening presentation, the pinup presentation, where survey forms will be distributed and folks will have an opportunity to do deep dives and talk with one another about those ideas. So I just wanted to make sure that everybody was 100% clear on that.
I'll tell you what I'll do. I mean, I'll put together, well, we can put together an all-office option. We can put it up there. We can see what the reactions are, what the impacts are. I mean, that's perfectly fine. I mean, I've given you my opinion on it, but certainly, we're open to it. My advice would be, in terms of voting, it may be best to wait till you have those designs and look at the bunch of them Wednesday night and kind of see where we stand on all of them. Chris, you.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I'm not sure who put this exactly, but I feel like we should have some acknowledgement that there's a danger of minimizing our differences. There could be some feeling like this gets presented as though there were only minor disagreements and we just have to tweak the plan a little bit this way or that way. And I think that especially relates to, for example, what happened at the massing meeting where it was like, here are the blocks, but actually the big decision, which is what color blocks you have to play with in order to kind of name the group. But I think there should be some recognition, actually, that there is a significant disagreement, and that actually a real issue has basically emerged from all this. And the real issue is that, in fact, there's not unanimity in the way that perhaps certain people had hoped. Right? It would all be much easier, is what I'm trying to say, if there were general agreement that, oh yeah, should build mixed use and whatever that means, we'll sort it out. But in fact, there's really sort of emerged a strong movement from the aldermen and from the constituents that they represent. And to know actually the plan that we saw is not working for us. So I feel like there should be some recognition.
So yeah, no, I think it's fair to say, and I will say, my one disadvantage is that I wasn't sitting there at the meeting that night 2 weeks ago. But I think it is a reasonably safe thing to say that we have heard that the community. I mean, people who, there may be folks out here who love that plan. I haven't heard from them yet, but that's okay. I think that, we have heard a lot of concerns about that plan from a lot of people. So that's kind of where we are at this point. And it's one plan that we've heard a lot of concerns about. And, but on the other hand, if you sit and meet with them and talk through the logic that got to them to that point, you can understand some of the constraints they're facing and see what led them to make some of the decisions they've made. And I want to at least go through those and point them out and say, here are the challenges and problems that they face. I don't think they just made it up. I think they said, okay, these are the problems we face. So, I want to put them out there, but at the same time, there may be other solutions that come from this set of constraints. But I just want to lay out the constraints and say, here they are. And there are essentially 2 significant constraints to the D2 site. One is its shape, particularly where it gets narrow over in here. And and the other is this ride drop-off situation. And I have firsthand experience with the T on the ride drop-off situation, because the first plan we did was the Gilman Square neighborhood, and we ran headfirst into each other on the exact same problem. Over the years, the T has adopted a very, very specific requirement for how they do circulation and drop-off, particularly for their paratransit vehicles, the little vans that say the ride on them, that they have to be able to connect people from various places into various stations. The ride used to pick up people who weren't physically able to get on transit and take them from their origin to their destination. In the modern era of the T, they're much more focused on taking them to the stations and having them use handicap accessible stations to get from one spot to another, even if the vehicles have to do the last mile trip on both sides. Because of that and because of those connections, they have put together, and some of it's ADA requirements, some of it's federal transit requirements, some of it is their own requirements. They put together a very specific set of rules as to where and how these vehicles have to work. They have to drop you off by a door. They have to be able to pull up with a certain side of the vehicle at the entrance to the door. They have to be able to be a certain distance to the door. The driver has to be able to see the person getting out of the van and going to the door. They have to be able to enter and exit in a direction where they can go either way when they leave. And this leads them to the solution that they tend to develop is, and this is Riverside Station. All right, is this sort of circular kind of thing where you sort of pull around and pull up and pull back out again. And when you lay that layout out on a wide open space like we have out here right now, you end up with something basically like this. The bridge comes down, you drop off here. You want to get to the low entrance that's 15 feet below. So you come in, you do this low entrance, and you exit. And once the station opens, they're very particular that they don't want to disrupt the situation and the layout that they have working at that point in time. And we talked about, can I get a cut up here? Can I make it work in such a way that people can do a drop off here? And they seem woefully uninterested in going in that direction. So what I'm left with is the idea that this problem here needs to be solved. And fundamentally, the most effective way to solve it is to solve it along with whatever we're going to construct there as the T station is being constructed. If you do anything else, you run the risk of having the construction start to interrupt them and their easements, and suddenly they are pushing the construction away from the driveway. So maybe you can slide it in from back here and then you slide the building back, but remember now, no matter how I do this, I start to get into a position where I've got drop-offs and circulations and all sorts of things between what we see as our key office site and the transit station that's going to support them. So how this interface works is one of the most fundamental things that has to be addressed, and preferably so that you're not then constructing adjacent to an open operating T station to be built together with it, which is one of the reasons why they've been on the focus of trying to get something off the ground early. They've been on the focus of trying to get something, not necessarily all of D2 built, but whatever goes in here built so that they can redesign this into their building, preferably potentially coming off the back here so that we don't have to cut a curb on our greatest pedestrian street between the station and Union Square, and finding a way to make that logistic work so that I don't end up with, this is a great, for a station on the edge of Route 128 in the Newton line, this is a wonderful answer. For Union Square, it seems like a very disruptive answer to the type of open space and green space and all of the other things that we've been discussing. So that is fundamentally one of the constraints. The other constraint is about the narrowness on the lot. Yes, wait.
So just on the station, I think you could go back and look at what they do in the Gold Line in Pasadena, which is that small head house on both sides of the street, so you could do that on Prospect. But even with the current general plan, you could also look at Assembly Square. So that's a real subway. It's a much bigger facility. They drop off on one side, and at Assembly Square, in both head houses, the handicap and accessibility challenged people are going to have to go up over the tracks and then back down again. So twice as difficult as if you had to drop off on Prospect. And that's the latest station built by the T, and it's right in this city, and it wasn't a problem.
I would like to have you come with me to the next meeting with the T and work on that issue, because if you can work on, and seriously, that's.
I'm actually co-chair of the oversight committee for the
But you see, so fundamentally that's an issue. I don't know what the solution is right now, but that's the issue to be solved. The other piece, just real quickly, and I think this is just the most basic way I can possibly explain this, and I'm just going to share a perspective that was provided from a couple of slides provided by the developers team. But fundamentally, office and housing needs have different shapes and sizes that they seek in order to make them work. Essentially, offices tend to be blocky, tend to be square buildings, tend to be, you reach a maximum depth around a central core where the elevator and stairway and pieces are, but tend to take certain sizes and shapes. You know, a lot of the development of office now, they're looking for these 30,000, 35,000 square foot floor plates. You'll actually see there's a little dichotomy with our own zoning, because we're trying to push people to not do the biggest office space they possibly can, because we actually want to create more human scale buildings. On the other hand, a lot of the folks who want to come in and do new office, they want clear floors, they want wide open spaces, they want, you know, the Partners Healthcare building, I think, is the most extreme circumstance of this. They're at about 60,000 square, their floor plate's like an acre and a half. We want to keep them at probably 30, but you have these proportions. I mean, this is a 145 by 170. And so you have to be able to fit those types of blocks on the site. Housing, on the other hand, tends to be long and narrow, especially sort of the typical center corridor of housing, where you have a corridor and units on each side. You tend to get a 65-foot or so width, and you can kind of slide these housing widths in the narrower spots of lots. And it's just a little bit more difficult to do that with the housing, with the office types. So when you kind of come back and look at the D2 site, and we can, you know, our design team can get a couple more of the proportions on it, but fundamentally, there's shapes and places where there's challenges. You know, you have the nice square here, you have some of the nice squares here, you got some things going on here, and then you want to kind of protect the housing behind from necessarily having that blocky office building right up on the back of it. So it lays out with some challenges. Now, that said, this piece here has like no problem at all as an office site in terms of size, in terms of shape, in terms of location, in terms of proximity to the T, and everything else going for it. So there's you know, as you kind of look across both D2 and D3, there's sort of different challenges with it. Now, I want to share, you know, we're in an idea generating phase, and we're very focused on trying to do the best we can to generate ideas. We've got the folks working over here with the base plans and everything, and what I want to do for the rest of this meeting essentially is hear what you guys have to say, hear what your concerns are, and if any of you want to take a base plan and draw your own plan for D2 and D3, that's fine. But people keep asking if the developer has a plan, and I think to some extent the answer to that question is the developer doesn't have a plan, the developer has 20 plans, the developer has 30 plans, you know what I mean? They've been doing their own set, this is from their own piece of stuff, their own set of massing studies of how to lay out a concept of what they could be doing with D3, and, you know, I mean, I think this is for D2, essentially laying out the program they showed last week, but you can lay out any number of different ideas and strategies for doing this, and sort of the same for D3. D3, it's interesting because you can refine a plan here to do what is basically an office block concept on D3 and make it work really well. It lays out well, the squares lay out well, it makes a good connection into Boynton Yards. You can basically build the Beacon sales site ahead of the rest of the site if necessary. And, you know, there's, you know, just here I have 3 different ways to do it. And then I've got sort of what our own team has been doing over there since this morning. And I don't want to dwell on any of these as an answer of any sort, except, you know, over the course of the time since we settled in at 10 o'clock this morning, you know, Russ Preston, one of our designers, was looking at D2 and D6 and kind of how those pieces can work together. You know, one of our other team members tried to work with office shapes and some of the challenges related to it and seeing what you could or couldn't do. And then I have others focused on D3 as well. But fundamentally, I think the point I'm trying to make is we're in a process of listening. We're in a process of hearing what you need, what you want to share with us. I and all of us encouraged the developer 2 weeks ago to put out the plan they had because they had an idea. I wanted them to show you their idea. I certainly don't want to be in a position where there's a feeling that they have an idea that hasn't been shared. So it's out there. It's part of the conversation. It's a chance to react to it, but it's also a chance over the next 2 days to tell us, well, what other ideas do you have? What other thoughts do you have? And help me understand how to work with the constraints, to work with the site constraints, to work with the shapes and sizes. I mean, essentially, fundamentally, one of the challenges with the ride vehicles and the size and shape of the lot is that D1, D3, and D6 all turn out to be easier office sites than D2. That doesn't necessarily mean D2 shouldn't be an office site. It just means that they're easier office sites to do. But all of that, we want to kind of toss all of that out there and sort of see what's concerning you, what we can do to address your concerns, what ideas and thoughts you might have. And I think, Brad, I don't know if you have more to add on that, but I think mainly I just want to hear what folks have to say based upon that perspective that I can provide at this point. That's a very good question. So the zoning that is in place today, this is something I didn't mention. The zoning that's in place today on the D2 site has a 100-foot height straight across it. As you go back into D3, in certain spots it goes up to 135. We carried that. I mean, it depends. As a housing building, it could probably be 8 or 9. As an office building, it's probably 7. Because offices have taller floor-to-ceiling ratios. One of the things we changed when we did our zoning overhaul work is we started talking about buildings by number of stories rather than by height of buildings, mainly because we realized that when you set a height number at a certain number of feet, you're actually giving a disincentive to building office merely by doing that, because now I can get more square footage of housing than I can office under the same height. So we didn't want to create that disincentive. So we said, okay, well, we'll do it by stories. One of the challenges with 100 feet, I mean, it's a 5-year, it was 2009 zoning solution. It was an interesting idea. There was a lot of community consensus behind it. But the challenge with 100 feet is it's not actually a height that anybody builds buildings to at this point. Essentially, developers tend to build 2 building types at this point in terms of construction types. They build a stick-built, basically a wood construction building or a wood over a podium, which building code says can go up to 70 feet. Or then you'll build a high-rise building, which is basically a steel construction building, and the steel construction buildings are anything that goes above 70 feet. The steel construction is far more expensive, so people tend not to build a steel construction building at 71 or at 80 or even at 100. They're usually at 11, 12, 13, 15 stories to get to that building type. One of the things that was in the developer proposal 2 weeks ago that's an interesting idea for conversation is that rather than building sort of a flat wall at 100 feet, what might make more sense in the design is actually to build kind of at the street for the most part at closer to the 70 or even 55, basically a 5 or 6 story kind of podium, which is more human scaled and more comfortable to you as you're sort of walking by it. And then at certain points on the site where it can handle it, pop towers up that go higher that use the steel construction that go taller than that number. Basically taking the same square footage that the old zoning would have allowed you to do and just shifting it into pushing it down at certain spots and popping it up at certain others. Particularly potentially putting a tower close to the station and then basically making the walk along Prospect Street shorter. I don't know if anybody has seen some of the pictures that were on our redevelopment plan covers when we were trying to first pitch the idea of redeveloping Union Square, but they sure show a 100-foot wall along the side of Prospect Street. And it's actually not that appealing of a way to build that street. I think it's better if you actually deviate in height a little bit and break out open spaces and stuff like that. So as we do the zoning overhaul, as we do the implementation of the plan based on the zoning overhaul, we could make changes on that. What I did at Brick Bottom, when we wrote the Brick Bottom zoning, was we basically said that you could go, I remember what it was, I think it was like 6 stories or 7 stories as a base, and then one building could go up to like 12 or something, so that you get kind of a variation. It's a little bit more interesting.
And I thought I'd just chime in very, very quickly. If anybody here was at City Hall the other night for the Planning Department's presentation to the Planning Board and the Board of Aldermen of the comprehensive zoning ordinance package that we have submitted for consideration, it's out in the public dialogue right now. You can find all sorts of information on it on the SomervilleByDesign.com website, as well as the somervillema.gov/zoning site. When we introduced that item to the Board of Aldermen the other night, one of the important points that we made was making sure folks understand the distinction between planning and zoning. When people start talking about building heights and zoning, it's very, very easy for us as residents to think that that is what drives decision making. And one of the messages that George and I and the rest of the team want to communicate is we will create zoning based on the community consensus about what kind of neighborhood we want to build. Zoning is a means to an end, and it will be one of the outcomes from this community process. So let's not constrain our creativity when we think about that sort of stuff.
Awesome. Because I have a pretty good idea. My name's Andrea Ranger, I'm a resident. So this is, I appreciate the spread that you have trying to figure out what's to go on these sites with the T-loop and our desire to not focus up the air out of Union Square as one of the property owners in your earlier session had mentioned. So I just want to recognize all that you're working on, because I'm going to bring in something very different, which is about energy. And I don't know if this is the right place to talk about water, but energy, if we were in Copenhagen or Sweden or someplace like that, we'd be tying into a district energy system at this point. And I was wondering whether considerations around district energy had been made or talked about, and then because it's a low-lying area, and the Miller's River flows in there in some tubes. I was wondering about whether this is going to be discussed at this point or in another session, what to do without natural waterways.
George, you want to talk about the old way of thinking in the lead, and I'll kind of talk about some of the current thinking?
In terms of the water
Sustainability and building performance and
sure.
neighborhood standards.
Yeah, I mean, I think all of them are good ideas. All of them are. It's the right time to be bringing those ideas into the process. It's not too early and it's not too late. We have talked about all of them, but we haven't dove deep into them. Fundamentally, we have some drainage water sort of problems in the area that have to be addressed. No matter how you do it, they're expensive to address. That's one of the reasons why we're looking at potential financing deals for that could potentially help make those areas work, including the dealing with the flooding of Union Square and the areas in Boynton Yards that basically have rivers running under them, and how to address all of that. But fundamentally also, we have been taking a fresh approach to sustainability throughout the entire city. We have a sustainability office in city government that focuses on this. We're looking at sustainability strategies and zoning and land use rules and everything we do. The early Union Square zoning had a lot of ideas about making sure to get LEED certified buildings in certain circumstances. We are very focused on the idea that we need to kind of look holistically at how to address all of these, and we need to look in the long term. I don't know, Brad, you may have more to add on this.
Yeah, this is also a theme that we've heard throughout the last several months as we've been doing our community engagement down here. And one of the really exciting things is I think everybody's kind of pushing in the same direction, recognizing that our environmental goals are perfectly aligned with the idea of making sure that public safety is respected and planned for in the square. We all remember July 2010 when obviously folks on the square and the merchants, as well as the city in terms of its public safety facility, were threatened and actually incurred significant losses. Folks' toilets were backing up, right, because the storm drain couldn't handle these things. So it is really, really important that we view this holistic neighborhood planning process as an opportunity to think about our drainage needs or desires, but also that green infrastructure has a role to play in placemaking, and that many of the parks and facilities that we all love best provide high degrees of environmental performance in terms of stormwater detention, retention, stormwater cleansing, and brownfield remediation. And we want to reconcile these things and have facilities that are of a size and a character that people can be proud of them, that people want to linger and meet their neighbors there, but that they also really help reduce the need to pipe stormwater out to Deer Island, because that's disproportionately what the city of Somerville and many other urban municipalities continue to do, and of course incurring all of the charges from the public sector standpoint and from a ratepayer standpoint when we're cleaning water that doesn't necessarily need to be cleaned.
Just a follow-up to that. So if the consultants haven't yet reductions that we could have for district energy system as something that they should be, that would be more attractive to tenants coming in, have lower utility costs. So that information should be gathered. And we have a district energy association, International District Energy Association in Westboro. So the info is available. Thank you.
Sure. All right, I'm going to go back over here. We got someone. Yep.
businesses that are in Union Square currently right now. So I think it's important to have a balance at the beginning with housing and commercial, not just all commercial. Just my thought.
No, thank you. Appreciate that. We'll go in the back. Here. That's you. Go ahead. Yep.
It's really exciting to hear you talk about CBA, community benefits agreement. There are many people who want that absolutely at the forefront of the discussion. I hope that we can talk about that as well. Following up on affordable housing, I was at the development meeting last week. One of the things that was really striking about that conversation was the depiction of the kind of idea of who is going to be moving into the housing. We kind of heard again this kind of framing of millennials who are going to occupy the R&D space, who are going to be filling a lot of the kind of maker entrepreneur space, and who the impression that I got was single occupancy, market rate housing that is going to bottom line whatever affordable housing is also included as part of that parcel. And I think that that's fine. But I also like my main kind of takeaway impression was one of kind of wanting to sanity check that idea that people who are under 30 aren't necessarily flush with cash and are going to take these apartments, because that's not my understanding of the entrepreneur class that currently lives in Somerville. It also doesn't square with a lot of the kind of general kind of studies that have been done about where wealth is in terms of millennials. Half of millennials make under $10,000 a year. And I think that if we're talking about proportions of housing and who's going to move into these apartments, I mean that seems to be a narrative that squares with perhaps the real estate market of San Francisco, but I think isn't necessarily aligned with the kind of creative economy, definitely in Somerville, essentially also in the greater Boston area. But the other thing that I wanted to say is there's been a lot of pushback about the number of apartments that are going in. There was like a month ago, kind of widespread panic over the prospect of like 1,500 apartments or something like that.
I think the total D2, D3 number on the proposal that you presented was what, like 500 on one and 400 on the other, or something of that sort. So it's around 900 probably.
Yeah, I guess one thing to think about, and I'm only speaking for myself here, but is if it were on the table that a meaningful number of those apartments could be affordable, I think you would get less pushback on the number.
It's 20% now, correct?
Well, the zoning that exists in place today has a 15% requirement. The zoning proposals have talked about going to either 1 in 6 or 1 in 5 in certain areas, and the 1 in 5 would hit 20% as you get closer to transit and as you get bigger in development sites. So, that's not the zoning in place today. It hasn't, so And where it falls is some combination of where the zoning changes go in Union Square and where the community benefits agreement goes. But yeah.
I guess my point is, if the conversation about affordable housing kind of always seems to center on like, well, what can we do? Like, what's the how affordable housing is really expensive. How do we fit it in where we can fit it in? And if the conversation was shifted to say, look, we're going to make affordable housing a real investment here, and we're willing to put more housing in order to make more of it affordable, it seems feasible that you could still get the bottom line figures you need in terms of profit on the property, and would get much more community buy-in in terms of what people are excited about seeing on that block.
No, I appreciate that. That's all good points. I appreciate that. Wayne, do you have something to add to that piece?
Only a couple things. These are just personal points, not anything more than personal points. But one, people need to remember that Somerville's average income is less than the state average, which means it's considerably less than Eastern Massachusetts average, and it hasn't gone up the last 40 years. Our income has consistently through 2013, which is the latest year on record, been below the state average. Not a lot, we're median income, but below the state average. That's not kind of common thought. Second thing is, I'm not in favor of monolithic anything, but I think that there's an issue with regard to where the square small businesses are now and where the future employment is relative to proximity, because more housing in the center of the square isn't going to help our retail merchants at all. We've got the densest residential community in the state by far, and they're already shopping there on Fridays and Saturdays. What we need are people Monday through Friday during the day, and new residents aren't going to add to that at all, and they are not going to help correct the fact that people who work in restaurants and bars in Somerville make half as much as people who work in restaurants and bars in Cambridge, mainly because of the lack of balance here.
So, wait, can I just ask you a question of sorts? Because it just, as we look at different thoughts, some of the plans have shown, and actually I think the developer plan showed the hotel on the corner that was closest to Union Square with commercial in it. Is it that you want the commercial kind of between the station and the square or closest to the square? Where do you think is the... No, personally, I'm asking you.
I think that you need to get the new upper story employment toward the heart of the square. I'm not saying 100% or anything like that, but if the intensity of new employment starts at D3, you're not going to help the retailers in the square at all.
Okay, but the intensity of employment on D2, on D6, on D1, those pieces that are really pushing to the core of that.
I think you have to take a look at what mixes are reasonable, and the fact is you can put housing in the quietest parts of Somerville. You can't put intense mixed use and job employment in the quietest parts of Somerville. So
Okay.
those things have to be in mind when you create a new plan. And I just say one last thing, then I'll stop. Usually you start by laying down a street and block grid and an open space network. You don't usually start by talking about building design. Now, I appreciate that floor plates are an important consideration in that, but you're never going to have a great city if you don't lay down a great street and block grid first.
But roads are tough because of it puts you into the residential neighborhood straight behind. But we've looked at a bunch of different ways. But something you cannot have 600 feet of the same thing. It doesn't. I agree with you. It doesn't work. Sure. Yes.
Related to what he was saying, and I agree with Alderman Vita's thing, but I think that based on this D2, D3, I really think that if we increase the population during the day with office space closer to Union Square, it would be better, because if the office space is in D3, I think a lot of the daytime shopping would go to Inman Square. It's a lot more developed, I think, than Union Square in some ways, and it'd be more attractive. But I think if it's closer to Union Square, it'll help develop it in that, like, restaurant, like, / daytime shopping kind of sense, whatever.
I hear you. I will say that the entire Boynton Yards area down here, we've always seen as an area that is also mixed use, but has a lot of office in it. And maybe Boynton Yards needs its own commercial center, retail center to work, and then everything D2, D1, D6, D7 is supporting the core Union Square if that's the way it has to work. But I'd still, anything I can do to try to encourage anyone from any of these places up into the existing square, we'd like to try. But you're right. I mean, the more you get closer, the better you're going to be.
I also think that boxy office buildings isn't necessarily the way our businesses are going to be. This is Somerville. It's more creative. I think maybe different is better.
Yes, we have, before I lose this point, because for those who haven't heard it before, Somerville's commercial market is going in two separate directions. One is finding, nurturing, and growing the big sort of the places like Partners Healthcare or the Smart Bear that took a whole floor of Assembly Square, the tech companies and the biolabs and the places that want some of the bigger buildings. The other piece is home growing our own companies, which I think is also incredibly important, and we've learned a lot more in recent years about how to do that and how to do that well, and that's why we have 27 acres of the city in our new zoning ordinance in this fabrication district, including most of the American Tube Works project, the whole Ames Envelope complex, some stuff down in Somerville Ave, the building occupied by Fringe Union right now to try to get these places like these incubator spaces like Greentown Labs and Artisans Asylum and these small co-working spaces and stuff to be able to generate activity. And even if they stay a company of 3 people, that's great. And if they someday grow to a company of 75 people, we'll have a floor of office space for them over here in one of the newer buildings in Union Square. But we've got to keep both of those worlds going in order to make it work, and we're determined to do that. Okay, it is 6:15 or so. We do have a 6:30 session, which I don't want to miss. So I've got 2 more hands up here, and then if I have 1 or 2 after that, or I have 3 more hands up here, and I'll probably call it after that unless there's somebody who's really got to say something. Chris, you can go.
I'll try to make this as quick as I can. I just want to bring our attention back to the MBTA. So, okay, we've got a couple of things that I see as not fitting together very well. On the one hand, we have very vocal contingent saying, hey, we don't want D2 to look like Maxwell's Green. We want D2 to be heavy-duty commercial, the kind of commercial that makes real money for the city, offices, R&D. Maybe they don't have to be giant boxes, but something like that. Then on the other side, we have US2 and others in planning saying, hey, look, we've got this constraint, and we have to get this done quickly because otherwise the MBTA is going to create problems for us. And so actually, we don't have time to sit around forever trying to attract corporate clients, whereas the residential stuff can get built right away because that's easy to sell. So my problem is that these 2 pieces, they're very, very important because they basically determine in large shape what's going to happen here, and yet they're not fitting together very well, and so something's got to give there. One thing that could give, right, is the MBTA. Obviously, they're not going to want to because they're a huge bureaucratic infrastructure, but at some level, right, there has to be negotiations. In other words, I can't accept that we're going to have to build housing on D2 even if we don't want to because the MBTA says so. That's not like, if it were reported that way in the papers, nobody would accept that. They'd be like, wait a minute, okay, that's got to give, right? So in fact, there has to be some other possible way to move forward that allows us the time we'll need to attract the corporate clients that we want.
Okay. I hope so. I've been trying to address this problem from a number of different levels. And maybe there's a design solution to this. Maybe there's I don't know, but I'm hoping to spend the next 2 days to continue to work on cracking that nut. But you've defined the set of issues I'm dealing with really well.
Yeah. I think so. Okay. Maybe a temporary loop or something, and then they build a better one.
Well, we got to figure out though how the better one fits the new building in order. There's just a set of sort of logistical challenges to it. But okay. we've got a smart bunch of people in the room, both here and over there, and I'd love to keep on. Both all of you and all of them drawing, and I'd like to be able to keep on working through figuring out these issues. Yeah, Karen.
Yeah, so I guess I asked a question earlier about why we're doing D2 and D3 like sort of in isolation, and I know there was an attempt to answer the question, but I actually still feel really confused about this because I've heard now a couple different things. I've heard that this is a comprehensive and holistic plan, but then I've heard we got to do D2 and D3 first so that the city actually has asked the developer to put forward a plan first. We've heard that this is just one idea among many ideas, but we're not seeing the other many ideas. I've heard that maybe the other parcels could be good office and commercial uses, but I've heard from other people that they could be better residential uses, and so I haven't seen any of the kind of rationale that goes behind that. I've also heard from members of Union United, which I'm a part of, a lot of other potential uses that I'm not seeing anywhere here. A community center, you know, a service center to provide services to homeless individuals and other people, excuse me. And so I feel like this is the space where we should be dealing with this, but we're not kind of addressing the fundamental question of why we aren't looking at all the other ideas, why the developer is allowed to do D2 and D3 first. And I think this is why we have to have not just the community design process, but actually a community negotiation process toward a CBA, so we can look at all the plans that are on the table and say, well, maybe this is going to work with what's happening in the other parcels. But until we know what's happening in the other parcels or what could happen, it's very hard to say if this is what should happen in D2 and D3.
Fair points all around. I will call folks' attention back to the slides that George flashed very, very quickly, which were 5 different alternatives generated over the course of 5 hours. Those ideas are pinned up on 8-foot display boards right around the corner here. It again becomes one of the most fun parts of the Charrette process for us, is where you kind of get out of the formality of these slide presentations and get to the more user-driven review of ideas and the small group conversations that happen at the pinup boards. But George, it might be worth just to kind of summarize very quickly where we've been so far today and where we expect to go over the course of the 3-day Charrette. If you could flash folks through, for anybody who arrived late, those a couple of ideas that are drawn.
Well, so yeah, just a moment here. Yeah, I mean, honestly, I can flash you through the plans that we've drawn, but but honestly, I haven't spent a lot of time looking at them to tell you exactly what the thoughts were of the designers who did them. I think they did them and they put ideas out there, and we want to hear more about them as we go. I walked around and took a bunch of pictures of what folks were working on before the meeting, because I just wanted to tell you guys we're working on a bunch of things, and we want to, over the next 2 days, continue to show you what we're working on. I mean, I think realistically, the interest on behalf of both the city and the developer to move D2 and D3 forward has a lot to do with the idea of being able to position ourselves well for commercial and position ourselves well for being able to move forward along with the T-station construction. It is very difficult for, it is not my goal here to spend my day defending developers, but at the same time, I do understand it's very difficult to go out and snag a commercial tenant with something that doesn't have some certainty towards entitlement. So if you have an approval in place, if you have the MEPA waiver in place, or you have the zoning in place, or you have some of those things in place to be able to say, I know I can build 300,000 square feet of office space here, I can go out and find someone who can do 300,000 square feet of office space. The sooner we do that, the better off we are, if we've come to consensus that that's where we want to go. I would like to continue to take a shot to see if we can keep talking in a deeper level of depth about D2, D3 than some of the other stuff in the neighborhood plan, because they are probably the things that are going to get built first. That said, if at the end of the day we have just as much interest in getting into much depth in D1 and D6 and others, we can dive into those too, and we're taking a shot at doing that. Karen, you mentioned the community benefits. I want to point out that there's a series of sessions over the course of the next 2 days. Yes, tomorrow at 6:30 is a session specifically on community benefits, on kind of how it works and what we can do and where it can work, and I urge you all to participate in that who are interested in the issues of community benefits. There's a session at 5 o'clock about housing diversity and affordability that relates back to some of the questions that were brought up a little earlier about the size of units, shapes of units, diversity of who's looking for housing and what's going on there. There's a session at 8 o'clock called Change Management and Gentrification that our own Dan Bartman will be leading. He's been looking at best practices for managing places where transit causes change and kind of how things are going and where we're going in the future. And I will say, I think I've said this on a number of occasions, if it weren't for the master developer, or if it weren't for the redevelopment sites, if we do nothing but bring the green line in here and walk away, this place is still going to change. And it's likely going to change in ways that we don't want and don't control. And as the mayor often says, Somerville's going to change. It's a matter of whether we want to let it happen to us or we want to control the way that that occurs. So we're very focused on the idea of what we can control, what we can do. The community benefits off the development is one of the options to address that. There may be a number of others. And and that's in that session as well. There's a session that starts in a couple of minutes about job creation, about Boynton Yards, where we also have our consultant who's working with us on fiscal impact analysis of understanding the impact of new housing and the impact of new jobs and what the impact actually is on tax base and stuff. So we're looking forward to that. I had one more person with your hand up here in the front if she wants. And then, Maggie, would you like to comment? Okay, just, she says she's all set, so.
Okay. Stephen Mack, Somerville Chamber of Commerce. Almost 20 years ago, the Chamber said, was talking, you restore transit, you can do thousands of housing units, and you can do millions of square feet of commercial development. Commercial development speaks to the quality of life, it generates the tax base, it pays for public works, public safety, and public education. And we regard, since then, those are the cornerstones of the village. It requires, it's been a long time. It requires a tremendous amount of work. This is the work. We're the workers, everybody in this room. And looking back over the whole period to now is that we believe there's a quality dialogue going on, there's quality people in the room. And it always included what we had locally because we were local. It also includes the developers. Now, a developer can usually, they're seen as dark faith. There are quality people with this U.S. too, and there's a real opportunity to get something done that's pretty wonderful. It sends a message, not just in Somerville, but to other places in the region, maybe around the world. So we hope that everybody can stay constructive, keep working together, keep challenging each other. And we certainly speak out when we hear something we don't like, and that's part of the whole thing. And sometimes that's friction, but friction is part of getting to the solution. So that we hope that this process stays together, and we all stay together and keep working. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes, thank you very much. I want to, a lot of folks in the room may be thinking, okay, well, we made some progress. We didn't make a lot of progress on a lot of things. This is a process of feedback loops. I've heard a lot of things from you tonight. We've heard a lot of things from you tonight. I'm going to go tell our designers what we've heard and what we want to do next. We'll get some more ideas out there by tomorrow night. If you come in for the sessions tomorrow, you'll be able to see more things on the board. And we'll come back, and this will be a topic of Wednesday night's discussion in our final pinup presentation, and we'll dig a little deeper into it and some thoughts and some feedback on all the things you all have said. I want to turn over for 2 quick announcements, and then we're going to go into the 6:30 session in just a couple minutes.
Awesome, thanks everybody. We'll probably take 5 or 8 minutes and get into our Boynton Yards and job creation session. Thanks.